Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles. Father Gabriele Amorth was chief exorcist of Rome for a number of years, highly respected and a personally very holy man. In many ways, he helped to bring the ministry of exorcism to the public eye and helped us to better understand this crucial ministry in the church. 10 Books has a new biography out about him, the official biography of the Pope's exorcist by Italian author Domenico Agasso, and I'm very pleased and delighted to have back on my show fellow exorcist Father Carlos Martins to talk about this new biography, the life of Father Gabriele Amorth. Father Martins, great to have you back on my show. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
So let's go right into it and talk a little bit about Father Amorth. I have read a few of his books. I thought they were just so incredibly insightful. They really taught me a great deal about exorcism, but also about the spiritual life, spiritual warfare. How did Father Amorth get into exorcism, that ministry?
Yeah, well, that was an interesting story, and which really comes out in the biography well. So Father Amorth was a Pauline priest. So he was in the Society of St. Paul, and their charism is evangelization through use of the mass media, through use of all of the different means of communication that we have in the modern world. And so the founder of the order, whom he knew, it was his interaction with the founder that got him into the order. He saw the means of communication as tantamount to carrying on the work of St. Paul, which St. Paul did everything he could to communicate the message of the gospel. And so the Society of St. Paul formed in order to disseminate that message. Father Amorth had no intention of ever entering into politics, but he found himself at the time in the period between the two world wars, being more and more involved in politics, being involved in an Italian resistance movement, a resistance against Mussolini and the fascism that Mussolini was inaugurating. All of this is to say that he had intuited from the beginning, from the time that he was a boy, a vocation to the priesthood. But there was a stint into politics. And following the Second World War, he had, if he wanted, a very promising political career ahead of him. He found himself in on the winning side and in the grace and the favor of the important people of that winning side. Combined with the natural gifts that he had, he's a very hard worker. A great speaking voice, just a great conversationalist, a great orator, and he had an ability to just be friendly and disarm you. But as influential as he was in that post-war period, his vocation to the priesthood kept calling him, and so he dispatched everything political and went into politics and went into the priesthood, was ordained and fulfilled a number of different important positions. The most important of which, and the biography spends a long time talking about this, was he led the efforts to have Italy consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So he built the theological foundation for that. I mean, it sounds obvious. Hey, why wouldn't you do this? But there are many good things that you can do. Why this particular one? So he had built the theological foundation of it. He had disseminated the request to the different bishops, and then organized the visit for the pilgrim statue of Fatima and so forth. And so he had built a promising career. He had been a university chaplain. When I say promising career, he had built a very worthwhile ministry as a priest. So he had been an editor, a publisher for different publications within the Pauline family. And then all of a sudden, he was 60 years old, and he was in front of Cardinal Ugo Poletti. Ugo Poletti was the vicar general of His Holiness. So in other words, the vicar general for the Archdiocese of Rome. Of course, the vicar of Rome is the Pope. But the control of the Diocese of Rome since the 16th century has been delegated to a cardinal vicar who essentially runs the diocese for the Pope, and that frees up the Pope to run the church at large and to do all the other things that the Pope does. And so Cardinal Poletti, he just dropped in on him one day, and that was the beautiful thing about Poletti. This was in the late 80s. You could just drop in on Poletti. So as important as he was and as busy as he was, any priest could drop into his office or his home anytime they wanted. And that was kosher with him. He welcomed that. And he realized that priests sometimes they just need a sympathetic ear, or they just need to blow off some steam, or they just need a friend at a particular time. So it was in one of these meetings that Cardinal Poletti asked Father Amorth, do you know Father Candido? Of course, Father Candido was Father Candido Amantini, a Passionist priest who was Rome's chief exorcist. And indeed, Father Amorth said, yes, I've met him several times. And Poletti brings out a sheet of paper and writes an official appointment appointing Amorth as an exorcist for the Diocese of Rome and to be the assistant of Father Candido until for as long as necessary. In other words, implied with this letter of permission that the successor of Amantini is going to be Father Amorth. It came right out of the blue. So he was just thrown into it. And
so he was 60?
He was 60 at the time, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. He was he had built up already a career that had taken him in many different ways, and he had been successful in everything that he had done. And you have to imagine that when he died in his 90s. He was well into his 90s, and so the career that he had, of course, we think of him as spending his entire priesthood doing exorcism, but he didn't. Why we think that is because he lived the charism as being a Pauline priest so well. He wrote about his ministry. He talked about it. He disseminated information very well about it. And so he put really exorcism on the map, not just in Rome, but in the Church Universal, because through those efforts, then, his impact became such that the pastoral care of the Church Universal was altered because of his efforts.
I wanted to talk about that because, you talk about his impact. Was he the one who established that international school for exorcism training?
So not a school, but an association. So in other words, it wasn't an endeavor to get involved with the training. He offered training to whoever was interested to shadow him. But what he wanted was to bring exorcists together and to have them, first of all, as an association, just for mutual support, so that they can talk to one another, share ideas, disseminate cases. And, if they're in a conundrum, if they find a case that has a tough nut to crack, there's a vehicle by which they can share that with others and be connected with others. So he formed that, and by the time that he died, it was an official recognized body in the church. So recognized as what's called in canon law a public association of the faithful. In other words, it is recognized as a person in the eyes of the law, as an entity within the church representing the Catholic Church. So Father Amorth, that aspect of him. His natural gifts led him to be such an effective apologist of the ministry, not just to people at large, not just to non-specialists, but also to the specialists. He really had a way, a kind of magic, if you will, of bringing people together. And that entity, the International Association of Exorcists, still it goes strong. They meet They meet post COVID. I know they were meeting at least every 2 years. I'm not sure if they're doing an annual meeting anymore, but certainly they meet regularly.
And was Father Amorth the one behind the push to have an exorcist in every diocese?
Well, no, that's a requirement in canon law.
Okay,
But
I see.
what Father Amorth did was he publicly berated the episcopacy. So not any particular bishop, but the episcopacy, in the sense, if bishops didn't appoint an exorcist, and even during his day, during the 90s, of all the dioceses in Italy, only 20 of those dioceses had exorcists. And in the United States has over 200 dioceses. And I can assure you, we do not have over 200 exorcists here. We have over 100, over half of them. And that's a great change from 10, 15 years ago, when, my goodness, we had maybe 20 to 30. And those bishops who had exorcists at the time were seen by many other bishops, by their colleagues, as being on the lunatic fringe. But it is a canonical requirement that every diocese must have an exorcist, and if they don't, well, guess what? De facto, the bishop is the exorcist. But if he hasn't appointed somebody, it's not likely that he's going to be doing exorcisms anyway. I know there are some bishops in the country here in the United States that they do the exorcism cases themselves. So it is an important enough ministry to them, and that they want to be involved in it, and they are the chief exorcist. They may have an assistant that they delegate to at times, that they have oversee maybe the intakes, or that at times, if the bishop cannot make a certain session, he has an appointed exorcist, but the bishop takes the lion's share of those cases.
Okay. And, you've been an exorcist for a number of years. You take some very difficult cases. Have you seen an increase in the demand for exorcism recently?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, absolutely. And that, that increase comes from, in my opinion, the de-Christianization of Western society. So that the re-paganization of Western society, is another way to frame it, is well, it's opening people up to the demonic, because the occult is not taboo anymore for people. Excesses, sexual excess and sexual deviation and sexual promiscuity. There doesn't even have to be a deviation, but just the misuse of our sexual faculty opens one up to the demonic, because the sexual faculty is the way by which God designed that we bond with another human being. So with whom you're sexually active, whether it is a person or a thing, such as an image that you see online, well, that bonding is happening there. And that bonding opens a conduit such that whatever is attached to your sexual object makes its way into you. And right. That's what makes, for example, that's one of the reasons why, for example, internet pornography, or pornography in general, so addictive. So there's a physical component to, or psychological component to it, where chemically it is addictive, but it is very much spiritually addictive, because you are introducing into yourself whatever spirits are attached and bonded to the image that you are lusting after.
I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Real Estate for Life. Are you looking to buy or sell a home? Maybe you want to move to a more family-friendly place? Real Estate for Life can help you with that. I myself have used them twice, once to sell a home, another time to buy a home. In both cases, they paired me with a professional who shared my values, plus he gave a cut of his commission to a pro-life charity of my choice. Real Estate for Life is a multinational company that connects pro-life home seekers with realtors and professionals who share their values. When you buy or sell a home with Real Estate for Life, the agent will give a share of his commission to the charity that you have chosen. So for instance, on a house worth $180,000, approximately $1,000 of that will go to the pro-life charity of your choice. And that's all without costing you a penny. It really is a win-win. So to connect with a pro-life realtor, please go to realestateforlife.org. That's realestateforlife.org. And on that as well, I mean, isn't it the case, because I've spoken to others as well dealing with this, that if a father, for instance, of a family struggles with this sort of sin, isn't he also inviting that into the family to also then attack his family members, his children?
Absolutely. You're bringing in that presence into the family. You're contaminating the home, and then that presence is there, and that presence is very patient. It has all the patience in the world in order to maximize an infection of the children, for example. And, so Father Amorth talked at length about elements like that, pornography and the occult, and just the results of living a life apart from the way that Christ wills that we live it. And he was, just as a witness, so powerful. And one thing about this biography that really captured, that I thought was done very well, was the way by which Father Amorth describes how he was formed. All right. So it has, and of course, I had never seen this in any other publication, but anecdotes that the biographer pulled together from different sources, journals of Father Amorth's, where he talks about, well, this is where I learned how to speak against the devil. This is how Father Candido told me what I must do, and this is what he told me that I must never do. And the thing with Father Amorth is he just followed every rule to a T. And then the following of that rules gave him the structure, mentally and spiritually, to kind of begin to see patterns. I'm like, okay, I notice when I do this, this happens, success happens, and it happens in this way. So I'm not going to veer from that. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press harder in that. And all of a sudden, the success becomes greater, and he develops his own style. So he's then free to veer off slightly from the method of his teacher into his own, while still observing the rules of, when you go in, you're establishing control with the demon. The demon is not in control. You are in control because you are the agent of Christ, and Christ is Lord of all. So you don't answer his questions. You issue commands. You don't ask any frivolous questions. You don't have a dialogue with him. You command. And the first order of business is to demand his name. And so I had never seen Father Amorth talk about his own training. And, for those of us who even are exorcists, you can't help but wonder that, because of course, our journey into this ministry has a trajectory, and it went through a course, and it's often different from one person to the next. But it was just an endearing thing to see how Father Amorth got his start.
How interesting. Now, some people are saying that Father Amorth is a saint. Why is that?
Well, because the man was holy, and I think, he had a powerful, commanding presence because of that saintliness. Everybody knew him to be holy. And by that, what do I mean by that? Well, he took his prayer life very seriously. He stayed out of trouble. It was not even possible for the man to get into trouble. He would take on up to 12 exorcisms a day, and that, like, these are not 20-minute encounters. So even he never took a day off. So he would work Saturdays and Sundays. So Sundays especially, he found that because it was Sunday, because it is a holy day, Sundays were even more effective for exorcisms. Christmas Day was really effective for exorcisms.
Now, is that because it's a solemnity, birth of Christ? Is that why?
Because it's a solemnity of the birth of Christ. It's a holy day. So on those days, God really releases a grace, a special grace. I remember one case I had. It was a demon who identified himself as Baal, and that demon, of course, I picked this day not consciously, but it was July 16th, the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal were defeated by Elijah at Mount Carmel. So this exorcism case that had this victim who was afflicted by Baal, and what was amazing to me was the fact that Baal was a mute spirit, never spoke, and so I would have to communicate with him through signs, through the raising of his hands, and it's tedious, it's slow, and they play even more games than they do verbally when you have to resort to that. So this case had gone on for years. And then all of a sudden, I noticed that there was a crying out in agony, like a verbal crying out, an audible crying out. And so this was unusual. I had never seen this before. Is this another game? And as the session went on, it got more and more. And so what it dawned on me, I asked one of the assistants, start reading the account from the scriptures of Elijah defeating the prophets of Baal. And the demon went crazy, and he was exorcised that day. Wow. So this had been going on over 6 years, this case, with regular exorcisms. And so what the grace of the day manifested in a way that, like, I learned a great big lesson that day, and I was just pleased to see in Father Amorth. So did he. So he really he had a heart for liberating the people of God and to bring them into a place of freedom. He loved our Lord. He absolutely loved Our Lady. He was a great witness to the gospel. And so heavens, the demons positively hated him. He had, from the beginning of his ministry, consecrated himself to Our Lady. And right in his first case, the demon said, there's nothing I can do to harm you because you have too much protection around you. And I remember hearing stories of when he was alive that he didn't even have to have men hold down the victims. Towards the end of his life, he would just make them lie down in a bed that he had in the exorcism room, and they would stay put. And I can tell you this, they don't stay put with me. If I don't have stout men holding the victim down, then it just becomes it becomes an MMA fight in that room.
Is that so? Then, are you saying it's because of his personal holiness towards the end of his life? They had to obey him.
Yeah, there was so much holiness in the man that itself became an extraordinary weapon against the demons, and they were powerless against him. Now, if you were to talk to him during those days, he would have said there was nothing special about himself, and he would have pointed to the fact that, what, the exorcisms still take as long, or they still take too long of a time to get through. I wish they would go through quicker, because for him, his experience was exorcism cases took years and years and years. It was not a 1 session thing or 2 sessions or 3 sessions, but it was years of sessions. And that when a new exorcist comes upon the scene, of course, the first thing they wonder is, well, if the church gives us this ritual, why isn't once enough? Saying the consecration prayer once is enough to produce the Eucharist. Saying the prayer of absolution once is enough to remove sins, right? And these are much higher realities than even exorcism is. But that's the point. Like, the Lord himself, God, doesn't want exorcism to be that quickly over. And why wouldn't he? Well, I think for our own pastoral good, he has to make it that way. How? Well, if we picked up demons and it was that easy to get rid of them, right? Of course, you don't get demons by making peanut butter sandwiches. You pick up demons by doing something really sinful. Well, if it were that easy to get rid of the demons you pick up, then you won't develop a hatred for the action that got the demons. In your mind, you'll be thinking, well, I'll just swing on by to the exorcist, get rid of the demons, and I'll go right back to my sinful habit. But for our own pastoral good, when we have to wrestle with demons and wrestle with them for years, that changes the game. It changes the game.
Right. And also, you talk about personal holiness. And one of the reasons I have so much respect for exorcists is because you really are sacrificing yourselves. It's a life of sacrifice to help free these victims from the demonic. And you place a target on your back, you become enemy number one. I'm sure Father Amorth dealt with retaliation. You, I know, have dealt with retaliation.
We do, but look, every priest lives a sacrificial life, and we just do it in our own way. The parish priest does it in his own way. His life is very sacrificial. He's given up his freedom. He's given up, control of his time. The demands on a parish priest are immense. They're and they experience their own retaliation. Sometimes you have to tell people no, and those are the words, like to tell an adult in church no when they want something can cause somebody to go bonkers, because as adults, we don't like to be told no. Mm-hmm. we like to get our way. But with Father Amorth, one thing that he never disclosed much about.
I hope you're enjoying the show. The rest of the show is behind the paywall, so please go to churchmilitant.com to watch the rest. For those who are not premium subscribers, you can sign up at churchmilitant.com/go premium. See you there.